Tonight, mixed signals.
The United States is fundamentally limited.
There's only Plan A to ensure that Ukraine receives what it needs.
Ukraine aid on the line as Russian troops push further into Ukraine. Plus, on Black History Month.
You're standing in the midst of history.
A look back at a sanctuary for education during segregation. And
without George Washington, we wouldn't have a country.
As we celebrate President's Day today, Bret Baier tells us the story of rescuing the Constitution. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The U.S. vows support for Ukraine even as Congress holds back aid. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. President Biden is underscoring the United States' commitment to supporting Ukraine as the 2-year anniversary of Russia's brutal invasion approaches. This as the Russian military boasts forces have taken over a city in eastern Ukraine. CBN News Washington correspondent Hillary Powell is monitoring the developments. Hillary, what's next as this anniversary nears?
Well, Jenna, the White House confirms that Ukraine's forces withdrew from Avdiivka. Experts actually say it's likely a morale boost for Russia. President Biden called President Zelensky this weekend, where the president emphasized the urgent need for Congress to really take some action, but conservative lawmakers are not on board.
The way they're walking away from the threat of Russia, the way they're walking away from NATO, the way they're walking away from meeting our obligations, it's just shocking. I've been for a while. I've never seen anything like this.
President Biden continues to blast House Republicans for holding up the foreign aid package, which includes $60 billion for Ukraine. In a statement, Biden blames congressional inaction for why Ukraine's military is rationing ammunition due to dwindling supplies. Russian flags now fly in Avdiivka, Ukraine. Russia said its forces took complete control Saturday after months of fighting. Ukrainian President Zelensky, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, and others advocated for the aid package at the Munich Security Conference.
Because of our collective strength, this war has been an utter failure for Putin. President Zelensky, the stakes of your fight remain high for your country and for the entire world. And it is in the strategic interest of the United States to continue our support.
One Republican Senator J.D. Vance, an ally of Donald Trump, traveled to Munich to argue U.S. funding isn't the issue, it's U.S. military supplies.
Can we send the level of weaponry we've sent for the last 18 months for the next 18 months? We simply cannot. No matter how many checks the U.S. Congress writes, we are limited there.
Ukrainian officials are urging Western allies to increase the production of missiles and munitions that could be sent to battered front lines.
We ask you to do the same, to ramp up production, to invest into new production lines. This is not going to be over tomorrow.
NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg is thanking allies for what they've sent so far, and he says he's really interested in seeing allies provide weapons and even military training. Jenna.
All right, Hillary, thank you. John Hardy is the Russia Program Deputy Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and joins us now. John, welcome. So with U.S. aid tied up in Congress, can Ukraine survive its war effort without outside help?
Well, thanks for having me on. I really don't think so. U.S. aid is absolutely critical. Europe is doing what it can, but it cannot carry that burden alone, especially since Europe was a bit late in ramping up production of artillery ammunition. We're trying to ramp that up on our side in the U.S. as well. But you know, until Europe goes up, until we go up, no one country can carry this alone. So I think it has to be with the United States. And by the way, the money that is stuck in Congress is not just for sending stuff for Ukraine. It's investing in our own defense industrial base, ramping up production here in the U.S., funding American jobs and American defense industry. So it's absolutely vital that Congress stop dithering and finally pass this aid bill.
This weekend, the world learned of Alexei Navalny's death, Putin's imprisoned political rival. Has his death sparked a sense of urgency for U.S. support for Ukraine?
I hope among some it has. I think Putin has it's unfortunate he's done this, obviously. I think for us, what we should take from this is just a recognition of how brutal and merciless this dictator is. And I think it only underscores the imperative to stop him. I mean, he's trying to do, in effect, the same thing to Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian citizens, as he's done to Russian dissidents, which is murder them. And so he cannot be stopped. If he's not stopped, he will not stop. With the current battle lines, he will continue to push on into Ukraine, and he might be emboldened to do it elsewhere. And the same thing goes for Xi Jinping in China. So I think the United States has to send the message that we'll confront aggression, we'll stop Putin's unprovoked invasion, and that means passing aid for Ukraine.
Yeah, last time you were here, we talked about Russia's plans for a nuclear weapon in space. Now, a German space commander is warning that a Russian nuclear weapon could destroy the global commons and that nobody would survive that. How grave of a threat is the idea of a space nuke?
Right, so I think it's this reported new developmental system is just one way the Russians might try to attack U.S. satellites. A lot remains unknown about this system. It's been reported it'd be designed to generate EMP, electromagnetic pulse, to knock out satellites. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a doomsday weapon, but the Russians have long recognized that U.S. military is reliant on space for communications, navigation, weapons guidance, a whole range of functions. And so, they want to be able to try to hold that at risk and deny us to render our troops blind and deaf in the event that we're trying to respond to Russian aggression, in the Baltics or elsewhere.
Yeah. All right. Always good to see you. John Hardy with FDD. Thank you so much for your expertise this evening.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, to Israel, where the Jewish state is sending a stark warning to Hamas. Its message: release the hostages before the Islamic holy month of Ramadan begins next month, or face an offensive in the city of Rafah in Gaza. That promise coming as Israel's government makes it clear it will not accept a Palestinian state. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Israel's government issued a proclamation rejecting the international community's plan to impose a Palestinian state on Israel. The Knesset is expected to ratify the declaration on Monday.
Israel categorically rejects international edicts on a permanent arrangement with the Palestinians. Such an arrangement will be achieved only through direct negotiations between the sides without preconditions. Israel will continue to oppose unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Recognition such as that, following the massacre of October 7th, will grant a major prize to terror, a prize that has not been seen before and will prevent any future peace arrangement.
In Gaza, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says 200 militants surrendered at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis.
We can say today that the Khan Yunis Brigade has been defeated. The Khan Yunis Brigade is no longer functioning as a military entity in any way.
War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz warned if Israeli hostages aren't returned by the beginning of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan in mid-March, Israel will press forward into the Rafah area. To those saying the price is too high, I say very clearly, Hamas has a choice. They can surrender, release the hostages, and this way the citizens of Gaza can celebrate the holy holiday of Ramadan. Meanwhile, Israel condemned comments by Brazil's president comparing the war in Gaza to the Holocaust.
Today, the president of Brazil, by comparing Israel's war in Gaza against Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization, to the Holocaust, President Silva has disgraced the memory of 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis, and he's demonized the Jewish state like the most virulent anti-Semite. He should be ashamed of himself.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog met with the Qatari Prime Minister on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference about securing the release of more than 130 hostages still in Hamas hands in Gaza. Family members of the hostages accompanied Herzog to the conference. Herzog also showed a book found by the IDF in Gaza and written by Hamas co-founder and former Palestinian Authority Foreign Minister Dr. Mahmoud al-Zahar. The End of the Jews depicts swords and daggers piercing stars of David and Jews drowning in a sea of blood.
The book mainly hails the fact that, first of all, we should not recognize the fact that there are Jews and Jewish people, but most predominantly it hails the Holocaust. It hails what the Nazis have done and calls for a nation to follow what the Nazis have done.
In The Hague today, hearings opened on the legality of Israel's so-called occupation of lands sought for a Palestinian state. That would include Gaza, as well as biblical Judea and Samaria, where more than 500,000 Israeli Jews live. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Julie. The opening of those hearings today in The Hague were marked by protests. Palestinians gathering outside the Great Hall of Justice called for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Inside The Hague, Palestinian representatives addressing the International Court of Justice opened a 6-day hearing over Israel's policies in the so-called occupied territories. Israel is not scheduled to speak, but could submit a written statement. Coming up, standing in the midst of history, a look back at an effort to preserve a key piece of America's past in the Jim Crow South. February is a month chock full of history and remembrance. And as we celebrate President's Day today and Black History Month, we're taking a look back at the Jim Crow South, where Black school children were denied equal education. The lives of generations of those children were changed by the Rosenwald schools. Today, many of those schools, though, are in danger of disappearing. Brody Carter reports on the efforts to preserve this pivotal part of American history.
Standing in the midst of history.
Pine Grove Elementary, built in 1917, serves as a testament to the segregated educational system of the past. As one of the approximately 5,000 schools established across the South for African-American communities, it symbolizes a vision of hope and progress.
I walked 3.5 miles one way.
Muriel Miller Branch, whose father helped build this school, recalls her daily journey to Pine Grove Elementary. It was a safe haven and sanctuary for education during segregation.
This is Jim Crow South, where everything is separate. Your worth as an African American was not valued.
Before the Supreme Court ruled segregated schools unconstitutional in 1954, African Americans often had no access to public education or attended segregated schools in rundown buildings with makeshift desks.
Buses of whites would pass by the blacks walking to school, spitting on them and throwing things at them.
That happened.
Living in the Jim Crow era led to constant tension, making schools like Pine Grove Elementary part of the innovative Rosenwald-Tuskegee Initiative, a transformative force in the education of Black children.
Education was like our faith. They went together.
More than 5,300 Rosenwald schools eventually spread across the South as a result of the groundbreaking partnership between Sears and Roebuck founder Julius Rosenwald, a Jewish businessman, and Booker T. Washington, prominent African-American educator and founder of Tuskegee Institute in Alabama.
Part of the pedagogy now of education began here.
They're designed to blend in to the community. They're not designed to be ostentatious, not a lot of exterior ornament. They became targets sometimes for the whites that were jealous about African Americans getting state-of-the-art schools constructed for them, but not for the whites.
Sadly, many of these schools are being torn down and that history is being lost. That's why some nonprofits are working with architects to not only preserve this history, but also pave a path towards a more just future. Historic preservation architect Jody Lahendro is working with Miller Branch and her daughter, Sonia, through their family's association, AMMD Pine Grove Project, to revitalize the school and keep its memory alive.
You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've come from.
In Virginia alone, Rosenwald helped fund more than 360 schools. The State Department of Historic Resources says about a third still stand mainly because of community projects and family-led initiatives.
It really does devolve down to the local community to go out and save the schools.
Architectural historian Mark Wagner with the Resources Department says development or demolition has caused much of the history to be lost, and grassroots efforts are crucial to saving those that remain to tell their stories.
It got people into colleges. It elevated the whole community and brought everybody up to, middle class.
As for Pine Grove, it's been saved twice and may need a third rescue due to a proposed landfill approved by the State Environmental Board. Still, contractors are working to restore the school thanks to the project and the help of the next generation.
Martin Luther King didn't walk for nothing. Mary Anderson, she didn't sing for nothing. Maya Angelou, she didn't write those poems for nothing. All these people, they didn't do all these things for nothing, for us to just sit here.
Nashai Jean Davis and Kamira Holman have stepped up to champion the cause of preserving this old schoolhouse. Their commitment helping to honor a significant historical legacy while offering a chance to mend strained race relations.
Our history is being erased out of textbooks. The story is being rewritten to fit the current narrative. And now it's my duty to instill these gems, these truths to the next generations.
It's time to do the reparative, restorative work. I'm not just talking about restoring a building. I'm talking about restoring a culture, restoring people.
The Pine Grove Project is one among many initiatives emerging statewide and nationally to preserve Black history. Now, it's an opportunity that we can use the lessons of yesterday that shape our present, fostering faith in a brighter tomorrow. I'm Brody Carter in Cumberland County, Virginia. CBN News.
All right, thank you, Brody. Up next, as we celebrate our Founding Fathers' birthday today, a look at George Washington's work to rescue the Constitution. On this President's Day, as we celebrate George Washington's birthday, a new book dives into the fragile American experiment. To Rescue the Constitution takes a look at our first president's work, not only to help create a new nation, but to create a new Constitution that has stood the test of time. Wendy Griffith sat down with author and Fox News anchor Bret Baier, who says current leaders could learn something from our Founding Fathers.
As an author, Fox News anchor Bret Baier seeks to bring historical figures like Patrick Henry and Paul Revere to life. This time around, in To Rescue the Constitution, he focuses on George Washington, who, according to Baier, is the only one who could have convinced a ragtag army to fight the British and believe they could win.
He had this ability to fire them up, and he had an ability in imposing this belief that liberty was worth fighting for. These guys, some of them didn't have shoes. They had bloody feet in the middle of Valley Forge in the winter, and yet they overtook the British forces.
What was it about George Washington, about his character, his person, that was so unique that, was the glue that held everything together?
George Washington was this stoic figure who was well respected, and in his silence, he found common ground with the different disparate groups to be able to link everybody together for the good of the country.
As a man of faith, Washington also believed God was on his side.
You look at the miracle of bringing together all of these people and ratifying this document around a very tense time, that had to be a divine intervention of some kind.
And the fact that he even survived, because he wasn't just commander-in-chief from afar. I mean, he was on the front lines with his men, and he never got injured.
Yeah, and that also is pretty divine intervention, you would think. It's a lesson for our times that you don't have to be the best. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to hustle and have faith.
And that belief helped Washington and his army to defeat the British. But even with a Declaration of Independence, the newly formed United States of America appeared anything but united or independent.
That time right after the war, it was really split, and people were wondering whether the U.S., which was not even the United States at that point, was going to go back to British rule.
Despite all this, Baier says George Washington held the country together, and in 1787 came the drafting and signing of the U.S. Constitution.
It's a unique document in the world, and there are a lot of people who say it needs to be adjusted and doesn't work right, but if you look really closely, it's held the test of time, and it has been a living and breathing document that enabled our country to operate in liberty.
What can our leaders in Washington, and really what can all of us learn from George Washington?
Dissent is okay. Don't be afraid of what feels like a very partisan time of different opinions, but listen first and try to find some common ground. Washington did that better than anyone.
And your book is called To Rescue the Constitution, and you believe that George Washington was the rescuer?
He was the rescuer. He's the reason that we have a Constitution. He is the one that essentially got it across the finish line. And without George Washington, we wouldn't have a country.
Wendy Griffith, CBN News, Washington.
Great interview. Thank you, Wendy. And still ahead, adapting virtual reality to bring joy to senior citizens. That's next on Faith News. Finally tonight, sparking joy and bringing back some memories. A group of senior citizens participated in a virtual reality study. Participants picked from 7-minute experiences like parachuting or visiting other countries, playing with puppies, that kind of thing. Most participants between 65 and 103 years old enjoyed the experience, saying it improved their emotions and interactions with staff. And one Florida resident described memories that resurfaced.
It brought back memories of my travels. In others, it brought back memories of my experience growing up on a farm.
And the study is part of a larger effort to adapt virtual reality to benefit seniors' mental health. And that's going to do it for us this President's Day. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow.